Good day, everyone. I'm Dan Finkenstadt, professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, and I have the honor today to interview Dr. Jean-Benedict Steenkamp, the Distinguished Professor of Marketing at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's also the author of Time to Lead, Lessons for Today's Leaders from Bold Decisions That Changed History. Time to Lead, the book, uses pivotal decisions throughout world history to teach key lessons in leadership. And the book was published in 2020 with a foreword by our very own Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting in the Air Force, Major General Cameron Holt. And it was recently named as the finalist for the 2020 Forward Indies Book of the Year in the History category. So Dr. Steenkamp, congratulations on the book's success. First, please tell us a bit about yourself and what led you to write this book, and maybe three good to know facts about Dr. Steenkamp.
Thank you, Fink, for being on the show. As you can hear, and as you know, I wasn't born in the US. My accent gives me away. I was born in the Netherlands. I lived there for a long time. I worked at different universities in Europe, and I moved to the US in 2006, where I became a citizen in 2016. I married a wonderful American woman in 2007, and we are very happy together. And my passion is history, but I was interested also in this. Writing a book about leadership at the time that I resigned as chairman of the marketing department here. I did that for 12 years. And then I kind of thought, I had then occupied so many leadership positions in Europe, in the US, in a political party, academia, organizations, leading an institute, that I wanted to bring these things together with history. So that kind of motivated me to write this book.
Great. So what is your actual leadership or ethical philosophy, and how did that develop?
Well, let's say, I think it is fair to say that I tend to be more of a directive leader than perhaps some other kind of leaders. And I think that there's a lot to do with the personality. What I believe is important is to have integrity in everything that you do, although I'm also aware of the fact that we are fallible. That means that even when you really want to do your best, you will never, let's say, do it in an ideal way.
So did writing this book at all change your thoughts on leadership, or did it just confirm
Yes. No, actually, the thing is, like so many people, I kind of grew up with that there are particular leadership styles that are just the way to eternal success, the only effective way. And, gurus are writing that, you have to be a charismatic leader. If you're not a charismatic leader, you're going to fail. Or you have to be a servant leader, another very popular thing. And so that is essentially the mindset of a lot of people I have noticed. And also, I was aware of it. But writing the book, I actually realized, while writing it, I learned a lot, is that there are a lot of different leadership styles and a lot of different routes to success. That is, yes, it is great to be a servant leader, but if you are not a servant leader, doesn't mean that you cannot be very successful. I would say even at a slightly darker way, look at the number of today's world leaders in politics, but also in business. They are not exactly, say, servant leaders or so. They can be very directive. They can even be, not ideal persons in many respects, but they are shaping things to a great extent. A good example is Elon Musk of Tesla, very successful. I don't think anybody would suggest he's a servant leader, but he's very successful. So my learning here is there are many ways to Rome. And the question is, you have to figure out more or less what are leadership styles that kind of mesh with you and to become better within, let's say, your tendency of being a leader in a particular way.
Very interesting. I totally agree with that. And I think reading the book myself and looking at all the different lessons from history, it's very apparent that you can take wildly different routes to get the same result or to get successful outcomes. Why do you think that history is a good place to look for someone who's trying to learn about leadership?
I could talk for ages about it, and I won't do that. But history is essentially people like you and me, people of flesh and blood that have done things that we now know about. So history is just what people have done. So just as much as children learn from their parents and from their experiences, we as parents try to instill values in our children based on our experiences, etc. As a leader, you can learn from what people in the past have done. And my point is that actually learning from time-tested leaders in the past is particularly valuable, because if you would focus only on the people that are living right here and now, you may have to change all your lessons time and again. Let's give one example. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, he wrote a book on leadership, a very self-serving book, and he was hailed as the visionary leader with COVID and so on. That was a year ago. Well, now let's put it this mildly. He has been under a lot of flack because of COVID and a lot of things happening there, as well as some other issues. In business, we have the same thing. Jack Welch was lauded as the best leader and manager of the 20th century. Well, General Electric is just a hollow shell of what it used to be. So by looking at time-tested models, we can learn a lot. And I'm not the only person. Let's look at the great man like MLK. Dr. King, he learned his leadership, and he's generally regarded as one of the greatest American leaders. He's very clear. He learned his leadership from studying the life of Mahatma Gandhi, and he adapted it to the American context. President Mandela of South Africa, he is very clear that he learned a lot from Dr. King's work, how to essentially bring democracy to South Africa. These are just a couple of examples of world-changing leaders that got their inspiration and their lessons from history, and there are many other examples.
With that, is there any one particular one from the book, if you're going to point leaders? Because one of the things I noticed about the book is you can definitely read it front to back, but I actually keep it next to my bed, because it's also the type of book that I'll hand to my kids and say, like, hey, read this one story from the book. You don't have to read it front to back to enjoy it. So if there was a story, if somebody would say, hey, I'll have a limited amount of time and I want to pick up the book and just test out a story, from time to lead, what would be the one story that you'd like to highlight?
I think I have my own favorite story, but that is based on my own life experience. But given what we are currently seeing, with unfortunately in America, some tension between different groups and the need to healing, I would say, if you just have only time for one, read the chapter on President Mandela of South Africa. What you will read there is follows: the tensions between the whites and the blacks in South Africa was much higher than it was than it is in the United States now, and a very ugly history. How Mandela had been able to bring these groups that distrusted, that even hated each other, how Mandela was able to bring them together, I think is a lesson of hope for us today, also in the third decade of the 21st century.
That's a great example. I'd have to agree. I've read that part of the book, and I think it's very pertinent to today's situation. Another part of the book that, as I talk to, it's not just like this front to back book. It's almost like a handbook that you can go to as you need it. Is aside from just the lessons of history, there's all these leadership assessment scales built within it. So can you talk a little bit about those, and maybe tell us, like, what is hedge fox, for instance? I look at the cover, I see the animals. For those who haven't read it, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so the skills is a very, very intentional part of the book. And my academic work is a lot focused on, let's say, essentially developing measurement instruments to measure essentially for people what is in their mind. And I use those academic skills to develop measurement instruments which are easy to use, that people, within the safety of their own room, they can just assess how they are on these different elements. And then I provide directions, okay, based on your particular score, I direct you to particular stories in the book to kind of study more deeply and learn more from them. And so what I try to do here with these skills is to essentially operationalize where am I as a reader and how can I use lessons from the book to improve, let's say, my standing on certain aspects dependent on my score. Now, the Hedgehog scale is based on the following, that two basic questions that anybody has to answer in their lives, although a lot of people don't do it, is the thing is, where do I want to go? What are essentially the overarching goals? And I'm talking about career goals. There are other goals as well, but the career goals in my life, where do I want to go, is the vision, the goal of my life. And second, how do I get there? Anybody from that is in the military knows that there is a big difference between the endpoint where you have to move with your platoon and how to get there. And you need to look at both. Now, and I use a scale that you can easily answer to essentially identify, are you a person that have really thought about where I want to be? And do you have the flexibility to use different means to get there? And based on that, and that is one of the skills, one skill that is also available on internet, and hundreds and upon hundreds of people have already taken that skill to do a self-assessment. It can help you essentially say, okay, am I really good in having a goal in my life and also having flexibility how to get there? Am I only a guy of a vision, but I'm not really operationally very strong? Am I operationally very strong, but I don't really have an overarching goal in my life? And I know some of the people in my very close family are operationally strong, but not strategically strong. Or are you actually neither of the two? And as I document in my book, actually the most successful leaders, they are people at least that have developed a clear idea what they want to achieve. Now, they don't always have that when they're 20, but they develop it at some point in my life. And I also applied that skill then to myself, in hindsight, of course, because when I was younger, I did not know that. And then I analyze my own life, and I think probably the single most important benefit that I have had in my life compared to some other people is that already by the age of 50, I knew what I wanted to achieve. And I figured out the things that were necessary to achieve that. And why does that help me? It has saved me a lot of time so that I wasn't fooling around from one thing to the other. I was in it for the kill, to achieve that what I wanted to achieve. So I think people, the younger you are, the better you look at it.
That's great. I've taken the scale a couple times to try to see where I land. I'm usually somewhere between like a fox and if I'm lucky, an eagle, but I'm probably the overarching drive to go in one direction, I probably lack as much as just the idea of like, being willing to try different things to get there. So I know we've talked about you've sort of had that vision for your life since early age, whereas I've definitely gone the opposite direction, which is I just wanted to try as many things as possible before I ran out of time. but
Fink, I think two things is, first of all, this has nothing to do with happiness. Reaching particular career goals doesn't necessarily make you happy. And the second thing is that there are people without a clear goal in their lives that end up tremendously well. However, they would have arrived there typically a lot faster if they would have had that goal in their lives already in the early instance. So you can still be very successful, but you can be successful faster if you develop a kind of a goal. And I describe it, and I invoke actually a technique developed by Metternich, the famous Austrian chancellor and the great foe of Napoleon, essentially how he developed that idea, essentially take a little bit of time to step out of your day-to-day thing and think about, what do I really want to achieve in my career? And what is then necessary? It will be time well spent.
Yeah, I agree. You know, hindsight's 2020, but foresight's probably worth a lot more. so,
Yes.
so I definitely agree with that. The other thing in the book, which I definitely resonate with, and I think a lot of military members might as well, is you talk about measuring grit. Can you talk about that a little bit? The scale itself, but also like what are we getting at there when in terms of leadership?
Yeah, so grit is the courage and determination to continue to do something that is difficult and unpleasant. Essentially, we are talking about which people that have grit have focus, have self-confidence, they have a strong motivation to succeed, and they are resilient in the face of disappointment, which all of us are going to have more than we actually like. And I grit is a central element in my book. And when I started to write this book, I mean, I was aware of the fact that people claimed, that to be successful as a leader, you had to be highly intelligent, or you had to have high integrity, or you have to have great humility. And I am not arguing that those are not good things. But the point is, what I had to conclude writing so many case studies across time and space is that actually it's not all necessary. We have people that are, that are not of high integrity and that are very successful. I'm not saying it's nice, but it is there. We have people that are not highly educated that have been very successful. For example, President Washington had a not high level of education and he was humongously successful. But what I found that everybody had grit. So all these people, like you and I, they're people of flesh and blood. All these people had to overcome disappointments, resistance, organizational inertia, and failure. But they overcame it. And other people did not overcome it. So these other people are forgotten. So for you to develop grit, and I talk about in a book, you can measure where your grit stands. And I measured, for example, that of the 4 components of grit, on 3 of the components I was really high, but on the 4th component, actually, I was low. So I had to think about it. Then I was thinking, I'm already at, I'm not exactly 25 anymore. Okay, how can I improve that? So, and there are ways how to do that. I'm talking about it in the book as well. But grit is great. And I know it's a big important thing in the military, but it is important thing essentially in any challenging leadership job that you have, whether it is in church, it is in politics, it is in business, or in the military.
Yeah, speaking of that, the DoD reads, a lot of their interviews. What we're trying to do is also talk to people who are interested in writing as well. So talking about grit, writing a book, and I haven't written a full book yet, but I've written journal articles and magazine articles and stuff, just writing, and I've written a dissertation, which was extremely difficult, but writing in general is tough. It's a very tough endeavor. So what were some of the surprises that you faced along the journey of writing this book, and where you had to sort of employ this grit to get through it?
Well, the grit is necessary because each chapter, so the book contains 17 case studies, essentially, of leaders that are essentially changed the world through one major decision. They made other decisions, but it was one decision which was really monumental that I focus on. So for me, the grit was in each of these chapters trying to essentially figure out, I'd say, reading a lot, then trying to figure out the key message, the lesson here. It was a labor of love, but also a labor of endurance. So I did have to have a lot uh, of grit to essentially even to write the book itself. But I've written books before, so I must admit that my doctoral dissertation, I required a lot more grit than this book, because that was the first, let's say, book that I wrote, and this is not the first book anymore. So I'm getting a little bit more experience, but I'm very familiar with the fact that your doctoral dissertation was a work of grit thing, but it was also great work.
I appreciate that. So I noticed when you were answering that, you talked about just, I mean, obviously based on the book, you had to do a lot of reading. And so just for the listeners, why do you think reading is so important for leaders and leadership? And then what are you reading right now?
Reading is essentially that is throwing open the windows of your mind. Um, all of us, whether you're in the military or in academia or in business, day-to-day things can completely kind of absorb you, that you don't really see anything outside of the thing that you are day-to-day working on. By reading, you essentially allow yourself and you allow your mind to open up and to get new knowledge, but also new ideas, new inspiration. Most of my inspiration for actually for my journal articles and for this book was because I was reading something that may not have been related, but at one point I was triggered, and I can't really remember that I was reading a book on world history, and somebody, the author was making a point about, how decisions of individuals can really change the world, and what we can learn from that, or something along those lines. Then I kind of thought, it kind of it triggered my mind. If I had not had read that at that point, I'm not sure whether I would have written a book. So if you read a book, you you will be stimulated to think outside of the box, and that is very crucial for all of us. And I would argue, given the current uh, military political situation that we are in, thinking outside of the box is more important than ever. What am I reading right now? I am reading a biography of the life of Marie Curie, or Marie Curie, and the first female Nobel Prize laureate, and a magnificent person, talking about grit. That is a great example of grit as well. And I'm absorbed in her life, and I find that to be very stimulating and very interesting. My daughter is doing her PhD. She is having a lot of challenges with COVID, with the data collection, etc. And I will recommend that book to her, to say, okay, you really have a tough time, and I feel with you. But here is an example of another woman that did it, so you can do it as well.
Yeah, awesome. So once again, just pulling lessons from history and applying them to day-to-day life. So I love it. I love it. So okay, so that's why we need to read, especially as leaders in the military. But if a lot of times I think military members consider the idea of actually writing themselves. So do you have any advice for a military member who wants to become an author? And is there any common author advice that you've heard that you'd say don't listen to that?
Um, I would say, the most important things that you have to keep in mind are some marketing principles. Um, who is your target audience, and what is the key message that you want to get across? Um, is the target audience interested in that key message? If you have established these two, then you have to think about, okay, how can I, with my experience and with my knowledge, because you cannot write a book only on experiences. You need to go a little bit deeper than that. Am I able to essentially get that message across? So that, I believe, is crucial. I have heard quite some people talking about the book, and then they were talking about, I'm going to write a book about my experience at, let's say, company XYZ. And I think that could potentially be interesting, but the issue is, why would anybody be interested in your experiences at company XYZ? So try to think carefully about what you have to tell others that is of interest over and above your spouse and your children. And I think if you think about this very carefully beforehand, then you have already essentially gained half the battle.
Yeah, I have to admit, like that was probably one of the key lessons I learned at my time at Chapel Hill under your wife and yourself. Learning was like, who cares besides you, right? So when you bring
Yeah.
up an idea, so I actually now, and just a little side note, in all of my classes, every deliverable that my students have to give me that involves them thinking of a new idea, the key ingredient is who cares besides them. They have to tell me, and they can't just say
Yeah.
like, I think it's someone who cares. They have to show me written evidence or spoken evidence that someone would want an answer to this question, right? And so I think that's actually great advice. Like when you're writing anything, like who else wants to read it besides you, right? Is it just some, therapeutic session you're giving yourself, or does someone actually want to pick this up and read it to help themselves? So that's great.
But there is one other thing that I would like to say is that other people need to care about it, but you also need to care about it, because it requires a lot of grit to write a book. Because the moment that you from ideas get behind the keyboard and starting to write, it is already obvious that it is not going to be something that will be done in a couple of weeks. So you need a lot of grit to be able to complete it. And I think that is going to be very difficult unless you are passionate about it. But your passion is not enough. You also need to have some people in the audience that are going to be passionate about it.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. Some of the best advice I got during my dissertation when we were talking about ideas is someone advised me, they said, if you don't wake up thinking about your topic, that's not the one you should be studying. So it's a fair point, because it does take that level of determination. Speaking of determination in writing, what's next for you? What are you working on next?
I'm currently working on, and I've already completed some 12 chapters on my new book, which is provisionally titled Transformative Female Leadership from Hatshepsut to Kamala Harris. So what I am looking at there is that most leaders, let's say most leaders in history have been men. That can give the misleading idea that women haven't played a significant role in history as well. And what I want to do here is, I've identified a large group of leaders, female leaders, that have really transformed society through their leadership, and that can be leadership as a queen, or as a prime minister, or even as an illiterate peasant girl. But those are all people that had overcome tremendous obstacles, that have become very successful, and I'm very excited about this, because there are so many different shades to female leadership, that I do believe that this book, that there is a target audience for people that say, well, we are really interested also to get a better handle on all these contributions that these females have made from different parts of the world.
I'm definitely gonna have to get a copy of that, because I know my wife and daughter are going to want to read that one, and I'm going to make my son read it too. So,
Yeah.
but no, really excited about that. Always amazed at the work that you're doing. If someone else, Dr. Steenkamp, wants to talk to you about this book or any of your other works, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Multiple ways. First of all, I love to talk with you, and I have a very warm heart for the U.S. military, as you know, Fink. And so one way to do it is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, and then it will shows up, and send a connect invite. I regularly post on LinkedIn, and we can be in touch through that. Another way how to get in touch with me is just to shoot me an email, which is a very simple email address. That is JBS for Jan Benedict Steenkamp, JBS at unc.edu, UNC, University of North Carolina, edu for education. So JBS at unc.edu. And you can also go to my website, that is www.jbsteenkamp.com. These are three ways how to connect with me, and I love to connect with you, and I love to talk to you.
Well, I really appreciate it, Dr. Steenkamp. I can't say enough about how much you've given and supported the military. I know there's been more than just myself that have come through your program for education and studying, but I think that this book is going to exponentially increase the influence that you've had on the military. And so I think it can be used, and I highly recommend it by military leaders, both burgeoning and established. And I think that's what's great in the book is there's scales that are built for I'm just starting out, as well as I've been doing this for a while. So, how do I assess where I'm at? Is there anything else you'd like to add to the audience of DoD Reads before we conclude the interview?
Two things briefly. Yes, my deep appreciation for the military has a very strong personal dimension. I would not be sitting here if the U.S. military, with the British, had not liberated the Netherlands in 1945. My mother was starving in Amsterdam, and my father was a prominent politician later on, and he was very well aware that the only thing that stood between the Red Army and him being arrested, he was on the list to be arrested by the Red Army, were the U.S. soldiers in Germany. So for me, it's very personal. One final thing is that my book offers a message of hope. And I quote here General Holt, who wrote in the foreword that you cannot become a leader that you are not. But what you can do is to identify what kind of leader you are and become better at it using essentially lessons from history. And the lesson of hope is that you can be successful as a leader in the military, regardless of the kind of leader and you are, regardless of your leadership style, unless you are becoming really extreme in any kind of leadership style. But as General Holt said, you can improve how you are within your particular leadership style. And for that, the book offers a number of lessons. And I want to thank everybody for their interest. And if they want to connect with me, I would be elated to talk with you.
Well, thank you, sir. This concludes our interview for DoD Reads, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.